Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here with DawgNation Daily's Brandon Adams. Brandon with the trip to Athens today. Obviously, Georgia held their first scrimmage. I think Kirby said practice 9 BA. Being out in the stands, what'd you think? What was your takeaway from the part that we got to see of that scrimmage?
Well, it's very rare for me to get a chance to be here. I don't get to see a lot of Georgia practice the way that you do all the time, and so I was really looking forward to that. And in particular, I wanted to watch the wide receivers for something I was planning for DawgNation Daily. And I tell you, when you watch those guys go through their little play polish thing at the beginning of practice, which is what we as media folks kind of get to see, quarterbacks throw into receivers. First of all, that's maybe the most, I guess, fun thing to watch because it looks the most like regular football. The other thing is, in the midst of watching these wide receivers and you see tight ends, kind of working in there in that same drill with the wide receivers, it's funny. I'm trying to focus in on guys who actually play the wide receiver position, but you just can't take your eyes off these tight ends. Darnell Washington continues to be just, the largest guy on the field. And another guy that I thought was visually very impressive today was Oscar Dell. Looks good in his uniform, kind of bigger, a little bit more filled out than you sometimes, expect to see when it comes to an incoming true freshman. That's a guy that in a lot of teams would certainly be in line for, I think, a lot of playing time, but just because of how physically developed he is, and obviously he's got some experience catching the football, but on a team like this, you'll have to wonder, well, how does he fit in with a Darnell Washington and Eric Gilbert, and obviously what Brock Bowers brings to the table. But nonetheless, getting a chance to watch those pass-catching targets, this was important to me just because of the latest injury to Arian Smith and the fact that I think we continue to still be a little bit intrigued by, is the Georgia wide receiver situation this year going to be more of what we saw a year ago, a lot of A.D. Mitchell, a lot of Lab McConkey, or how about guys working their way back into the rotation like Harris Jackson, Dominic Blaylock? What can that pecking order be? Try to get a little bit of a glimpse of that today, and it was certainly interesting to see if you came away with maybe not all your questions fully answered in regards to that.
Well, to Brandon's point, they line the receivers and the tight ends together, and it's not like you can go, oh, that was a tight end, that was a receiver. The tight ends run like receivers. You watch Brock Bowers, and he's cutting and moving every bit as fast as those. In fact, he's running parallel, him and Karras on both sides, and they're cutting the same time, they're breaking the same time, and that's what you hear the defenders talk about. Now, it wouldn't be a Georgia practice, BA, if we didn't hear Kirby with the microphone.
Yeah.
And we didn't even get out of the stadium before he lit into Tyke Smith. What do you think about the way Kirby motivates these guys and gets on them?
I think it's interesting because he does have the microphone on. You can sort of hear that voice booming. And I know you've kind of joked before about, Kirby with the microphone. You did hear that for Tyke Smith a little bit right there. And listen, you've played on teams going back to, I've played on teams going back to high school time. And like the one thing we know is, coaches are going to coach you hard, and Kirby's going to do that there too. And so whether it be Tyke Smith now or somebody else the next practice, that's the one thing that Kirby's not going to allow for. When you move from drill to drill, he's going to want you moving on the hop, as they like to say. And if you've never gotten a chance to see one of these practices, or maybe if you can't really get this from the videos that Georgia shares, I think maybe one of the most palpable things from the practices themselves is just the intense energy, the way in which everything is moving. It's like the two-spot drills where I mentioned before, quarterback throwing to wide receiver. It's never, as Mike kind of alluded to, it's never one quarterback throwing to one pass catcher at any one time. You have multiple quarterbacks throwing to, each throwing to their own, receiving target. With every drill, you have those two-spot drills constantly going on. So a Georgia practice is this constant movement, and if you're not in the flow of all that, then Kirby is going to notice that. And obviously, when the media's there, that's one of the things that probably ends up being the biggest takeaway. It seems like almost every time somebody's getting called out for, maybe not fully doing what they're supposed to be doing.
And typically, it's the best players. It used to be Richard LeCount that he lit into, and that was Kirby's pet project. Obviously, now Richard with the Cleveland Browns. It's not a bad thing necessarily. Now, you better correct it, but if the head coach is watching Eric Gilbert or Tyke Smith or Malachi Starks, that's good news. He's pushing because he needs those guys, BA. There's a lot of new shoes, a lot of players trying to fill old shoes. And turning now to the press conference and getting your impression, it was pretty clear that Kirby feels there's a long way to go.
Well, I think the sense that I got, once again, I don't go to a lot of these live. I watch them on video the same way a lot of our audience does. But you definitely got the sense, sitting in that room, and then we're really just a couple of minutes removed from the press conference. It just happened. You definitely got the sense we're in the 2022 season now. Like, we're not looking back on the fun of 2021. And, like, we're in the midst of 2022. Georgia was in Sanford Stadium for the scrimmage today. That's a little bit of a step in that direction. But the questions today all related to kind of the preparation that are ongoing. And Kirby loves this sort of camp mentality, right? You haven't turned the page to true game prep for Oregon as of yet. They've got another scrimmage again next Saturday. Smart talked about how important it'll be for Georgia to perform better there than it did here. but you definitely got the sense that we are in the midst of this 2022 campaign, putting those building blocks together. And obviously today, as came up during this press conference, some of those component pieces not available. There was no Tate Ratledge today. Ernest Green's dealing with a little bit of, I think Kirby Smart described it as a hamstring injury. Maybe more prominently than that, I know there had been some chatter related to Kendall Milton, and obviously Aaron Smith, who it's been reported is going to have the surgery or has had the surgery. So that's at least 4 names right there on the offensive side of the ball that were not full go today, or in the case of Ratledge, Smith, and Milton not seen at all in that early portion. So you don't like to talk about the word injury this time of year, but in this particular case, minor stuff, obviously, in the case of Kendall Milton, but it's maybe a little bit more serious than that when it comes to Arian Smith. But you are talking about injuries once again, which is, as I said, not what you want to be doing this time.
Yeah, there's always going to be a little bit of camp attrition, and Kirby did point out that they're in, 9 practices in 10 days. They're still in that hotel, I believe. They haven't moved out of the camp phase yet, and I think they will shortly. You mentioned the offensive guys being out, and yet it sounds like the offense, Kirby came out and said the offense is ahead of the defense. And I said, well, now, wait a minute. That's not what we saw at G-Day, but he pointed out they were running the ball effectively, and, oh, by the way, the freshman running backs, they impressed today, Brandon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And listen, I think that we look at Branson Roberts, and this is already a guy that I think is a pretty big fan favorite among UGA fans because he just sort of looks the part. And I think one of the things that's been interesting about hearing your practice report, Connor Riley's there as well, Andrew Paul is a guy, another incoming freshman running back, that I really sort of felt like I knew less about than Branson Roberts. And I've certainly been accused on my show, DawgNation Daily, of talking too little about him in comparison to Robinson. But it's been interesting to hear the eyewitness accounts from people who see practice a lot more frequently than I do, that actually visually, Paul doesn't look that much different than Branson Roberts.
Right.
But that Branson's sort of this hulking figure, that Paul himself kind of casts a little bit of a shadow. So with Milton right now being banged up, you certainly hope that's not a story for him later on in the season. But you also know the running back position, almost always somebody's going to be banged up, and that's just the nature of playing running back. But if you did have some freshmen that could contribute to your depth or make a play for you at some point in time, obviously you'd take that. It was interesting to hear a lot of praise for Kenny McIntosh today. I'm talking about a lot of praise from Kirby with the camp that Kenny's having, and also for Dejon Edwards too. It's probably not a surprise either of those guys are performing well right now, but Kirby didn't really hold back in saying nice things about them, and you're right, the freshman running back were part of that too. This is still one of the most, I think, relative to the number of guys in the room, as deep a position group, I think, as Georgia has. I'd say tight end maybe first, but, that running back position in terms of the potential guys who could really be impact players for you, there aren't very many position groups at Georgia that offer more names than what the running back spot has. And so it's also an area in which I'd like to see Georgia kind of increase its statistical performance from where it was a year ago. So for a UGA fan, I think you take it as good news that a lot of guys from that group, one way or another, are earning a little bit of a pat on the back right now, and we'll see if that translates later on this fall. But I think you took that as a positive based on what Smart said there a moment ago.
I did, and Kirby talked about the competition inside at guard, and this is a bigger and I think more physical line. I do think this is going to be a very good run team. Not that last year's wasn't, but I feel like this offensive line is going to be more physical, more nasty, right? Stacey Searles is known for some nastiness. Now, North Carolina led the ACC in rushing. He's been here, this is his second go-around. So the offensive line, competition at guard, quarterbacks today. Kirby didn't say much, ear to the ground. Stetson holding the ball a little bit. Beck maybe not as sharp as you'd like. Vandergriff actually moving the team. But it's Stetson's job. Let's be clear about this. This is Stetson Bennett's team. He's the guy with the experience. He's got great mobility. He had some nice runs today. And if he's holding the ball a little bit, it may have had to do with some of the talent out there in the secondary and the fact that the receiver ranks are a little bit thin. It does take some time to get back into 11 on 11.
Well, you mentioned the guard position. I want to go back to that for a moment because you're an old military guy. My guess is back in those days, probably had a little bar fight every now and then, a little bit of wild, sometimes that shore leave, you have a little bit of a crazy time. That's kind of what I want my guards to be. I want my guards to be street fighters. I want my guards to be barroom brawlers. And I think I know that's what Tate Ratledge is, and I get the sense that's what Devin Willock could kind of be there too. Which is not to say I definitely want to be, I'm speaking as a fan here, I definitely want to be Willock starting at left guard. I think I do want Tate Ratledge starting at right guard. But my point is, I want those to be your mean dudes, right? Those are not the guys who take the SEC media days. Those aren't the guys that speak at the press conferences. They just roll up their sleeves and they fight. And that's what you want your guards to do, because if you got that happening with the interior of your offensive line, it does create more opportunity for Stetson Bennett to throw the ball, but it opens up much larger holes to run the ball through there as well. So Kirby described those guards today as maybe bigger than what George has had before, but I also want them to be, I like the idea of them being pretty mean too, pretty nasty, and I know that's what Ratledge is. That's been his reputation going back a long time in high school, and I mean this in very complimentary fashion. And I think that's kind of what Willett could be for you there as well.
And throwing Xavier Truss now, a little bit of experience. He's in the battle too, and Micah Morris.
Well, he definitely brings the size to the table. That's the one thing that Truss definitely brings to the table is a good bit of size there in that discussion.
Yeah, and as for Stetson, let's be clear, Brock Bowers isn't out there running every route either. So, when you know what you've got, you work on the things that you know you have to get better at. I mean, let's face it, these coaches script these scrimmages to expose themselves, to work on different things that they know. If they wanted it to be prettier, it could have been a lot prettier. But they're going to work on their weaknesses. Kirby knows what Dan Lanning is going to take away 1, 2, and 3. So they're going to work on 4, 5, and 6. And I think that's some of what we heard was taking place in the stadium today.
Kirby also kind of gave a little bit of a compliment in the direction of Gunnar Stockton there as well. And I had somebody the other day tell me, yeah, you know what, I kind of heard that Gunnar's doing some pretty good things too. So I'm certainly not trying to make it be that he's the star of camp, because a lot of this is based on second and third hand information. But it is interesting to hear that, kind of right now occupying that sort of fourth team role, you presume during the season that's maybe your scout team quarterback, which means you actually get a pretty long look during practice. That's what you become there. But for a lot of folks who saw the numbers that Gunnar put up while playing at Rabun County, some of the off-the-record buzz, Kirby Smart a little bit right there. It seems like that Gunnar at least has done some things to earn some praise thus far during this training camp, which I think is probably a good thing, and we'll see what it adds up to as the years progress and the months progress for Stockton. But Kirby kind of throwing a compliment Gunnar's way today, I thought was kind of interesting.
And noteworthy, because he said he doesn't often get to see him in actual 11-on-11 doing the scout. But I will remind you, 2 years ago, the scout team quarterback was J.T. Daniels, finished 2020 as the highest-rated quarterback coming back. Last year, Stetson Bennett was number 4.
Listen, I'll tell you this. It's way better to be the number 4 quarterback than to be number 3 quarterback. And I'd love, if we ever had more time to ask more questions, this is one of the questions I really would like to ask. Like, what does your number 3 quarterback do? Because during the season, number 4 quarterback, you're getting to be scout team quarterback. And, the legend of Stetson Bennett really started because of the work that he did as scout team quarterback in 2017. If you're the backup quarterback, you've obviously got a pretty big role in practice, both in terms of traditional backup stuff, but also getting a chance to play some with the ones there as well. It's that number 3 guy sometimes, I'm not quite sure what that guy's doing during practice. So, for a guy like Gunnar, if you are that number 4 quarterback, if you are that sort of scout team quarterback during the season, that's not an sort of small role on a team like this.
No, it's why JT went there to get all the reps. Mm-hmm. It's why Stetson was there. And Todd Monken, interestingly enough, he was talking about Tate Ratledge when he said this. Mm-hmm. But he said, to fire a gun, you need to be the one pulling the trigger, not the one watching. Now, I know you always hear about mental reps.
My guess is Tate Ratledge just fired a gun or two in his life. My guess is he may have one hanging on the rack in the back of the pickup truck.
In the last 5 minutes. No, we're just kidding here. Well, I want to do a wrap. This is just our quick wrap. We like to do this after press conferences. I really appreciate Brandon joining me. Yeah. Thank you. And, of course, you guys, you can watch DawgNation Daily every day.
It's fun to be the one answering the question today. That's a little bit different feel for me, so it's fun to be able to do that.
So 10 a.m. Monday, right?
That's exactly
10
right.
a.m.
every reaction to what I had a chance to do today.
Exactly.
Kind of unusual for me to be in Athens, so fun to be here doing that. Also, Mike, looking forward to reading everything that you've got coming out of all of this. Obviously, still a lot of aftermath left over from getting a chance to hear from Dell McGee and Todd Monken and the 2 defensive coordinators. It's actually been a pretty big week of news here around UGA, so I'm looking forward to consuming a lot of that from both you and Connor Riley.
Connor Riley as well. And Brandon can react to what Brandon said today on Monday, so we can go back and reflect. Thanks for joining us today. I hope everybody has a great weekend.